Hello, welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania and Unreal Engine. So yesterday we worked on getting the castles and flags in place, and a bit earlier on today I did some improvements in how the sectors are navigated so that they work properly in the sense of the reliability of the order. So if we go all the way up to the top, we are on the same space. If we cycle through them, we cycle in the same order. And also the kind of possession, whether the sector has a castle that you own, it now possesses that castle. If you go to one you don't own, it doesn't possess that castle. There's still some minor issues, ignoring the fact that the order of the sectors is still a bit awkward, despite I did confirm that they were all spawned at the expected location, but the order it iterates through them is still not quite correct. I don't know necessarily why that is, but nonetheless there's also a kind of flicker if you try and go too far down. Strangely enough, not if you go too far up, but nonetheless. So there's some camera issues, and obviously, as we saw when I first started, the camera doesn't focus on the possessed sector. So one thing that I did find was that I was originally setting the camera view and then unpossessing the sector if you moved to one that wasn't yours, but doing that with the player controller looking after the camera, this auto manage active camera, meant that the camera just kind of reset effectively to looking at nothing. So one of the key things was that originally page up and page down used to scroll through the sectors and focus on it, but now there's a little bit more logic in there to ensure that we're not trying to look at a sector that doesn't exist, but beyond that we actually trigger this event. And this event is replicated to the server and only the server, so this executes only on the server. And that just does some more validation, make sure that we're ignoring the unpossessed there, that's not one, make sure that we're actually looking at a correct sector, and then we set the view to that sector, and if it happens to be one we own, then we possess it. And that's because possession is actually done only on the only on authority only anyway, so we didn't in this case it wasn't particularly working very well anyway. But that means that the server is control of picking the sector, which means that while we pass the index through, the index is always the same sector for all the clients, which is quite good. So that was kind of the main thing that I changed earlier today. This function is no longer used. Oh, wrong button. Did a couple more tweaks, I think, mainly just tidying up. So instead of duplicating a lot of this, I actually just called that event, added some more output text, try and figure out where the sectors were being spawned, that kind of thing. So what I'm actually going to try and do today is focus on trying to build another building within our sector, and trying to get that to kind of roughly map to how it would in the final game. So we're going to take our sector, and this is our horizontal box, sorry, take our UI, effectively our HUD, and what we'll add is a vertical box, this one. We'll add that at the end here, and in there we're going to add 2 buttons and 3 lots of text. So the buttons, some text for the buttons themselves, and then some text in between, like so. Obviously we'll sort the sizing out in a moment. So we want it to be right aligned in all cases. we want to shrink the text down to, let's do 12, so actually we'll take that down to 10, and we'll call this, the text for that will just be a plus, and this one will be a minus. Take it down to 10. Forgot my horizontal box, that's why it's not quite working as I was envisioning. So just push all them into the horizontal box. That's better. That's the kind of end result that I was looking for. So make sure everything's neat. Actually, we'll just keep that aligned middle just so that it lines up. Doesn't really change much where that minus is. This minus is still a bit awkward and off center, as is the positive actually. Moving the padding helps a little bit, makes it a little bit neater anyway. Won't worry about the fact that it's there. And this one is, I think we'll just start with 0 to be fair. So we'll actually start with 3 zeros, just so that it doesn't change size later on. We'll make that more static in how it displays the numbers. So our button, put that back over. Our button on the right are, I guess, our positive and negative are actually the wrong way around, so it's normally the other way. So this one will be builders. So we'll actually say that this is for our mine specifically, and we'll do that by adding the mine icon. Again, just kind of to make it clear. Yep, I think that's fine. So because we're likely going to add the other buildings if possible. So the text needs to be a variable. That's all that we require from this case. So we jump into the graph. So at the moment the graph is showing if the player has a pawn and it's a sector, we display the resources, so that was just doing the resource stuff, and then we display, if there's a castle, then we display the population, but we're actually also going to display the builders. So we're going to create in our test section, we're going to create a structure. Is it a structure we probably want? No, I think we're going to create, what are we going to create? See what makes most sense. So a whole lot of these components are obviously related to very specific scenarios within the engine. The only one that was sounded generic enough was a gameplay component, or a gameplay task, which was here, gameplay tasks. Don't really know what that's about. So I kind of want the construction stuff to be managed by something specifically. So we'll stick with an active component, see if that construction component. So I just wonder if yeah, it seems like you can't kind of dynamically add components, but that's okay. We'll add that construction component. It kind of means that I still need the structure, because for each building that needs to be built, we need a number of bits of information for it. So we kind of need to keep that together. So we will create a structure, pretty much as we were going to do before. We'll call it our construction job. Now our construction job will have a name, and so we'll have a name and we'll have now the construction job probably is very similar to any other job within the within the game, whether it's a design / research job, whether it's a manufacturing job, whether it's a construction job. They may all be the same. So I'm going to try and kind of make this so that potentially we could work with anything with it. So have assigned population. Now the way that the game works is that you're able to add or remove people assigned population during the course of that job, and the time has to adjust accordingly. Based on some tests that I've done and some things that I've read and seen, the total time of that job is divided by the amount of people that worked on it minus however long has already passed. So we want the initial time for that job, we want the current time, and the elapsed time, I think might be a nice way of describing it. Assigned population will be an integer. Initial time will have them as floats because it's going to go down by kind of decimal values. So I think that's okay. So within our construction component, we will have an array of jobs. In this case, they're currently construction jobs, but we'll see how good they are to work for anything else. So we're going to need we'll do it as a custom event so that potentially other things can react to the beginning and the end of a job. So begin job and finish job. Maybe it was better as no, we'll leave it as that. So the begin job is going to need two key things. It's going to need to know what the name of the job is and how long it's going to take. We'll do that as a float again, just so that the timing's all consistent. When a job finishes, we just want to know when it's done. So actually that's going to be, we call it job complete. We don't do that. And this one will basically say the name of the job and maybe other things, but we'll keep it as the name of the job for now. So we also want a function to assign population and unassign population. And for both of those we need to know for which job that's for and how many people we're adding or how many people we're removing. So we'll start off with when a job begins, and effectively we need to add a new job to the job array. Job. How do we make that new structure? There we go. Make construction job. So we give it its name, initial time, and then we need to add to our array of jobs. So fairly straightforward in that regard. There's no elapsed time, there's no current time, although the current time probably can be the same as the initial time, but there's definitely no elapsed time. And in our assign population, we just need to find our job with that name. Now, it might be easier if the jobs was a map, because we can use the map to determine whether things are or are not done. Unfortunately, if we use a map, we can't replicate that information. Now we don't want to replicate the functionality as such. Only the server should be doing these things, creating a job, managing the job. But we do want to replicate the data so that the clients can see how long and what jobs are going on and have access to it. So unfortunately, to replicate that array, we have to leave it as an array, which means the find is a little bit more awkward. We actually have to iterate over everything. Oh, we need a break. Take that away. And So I think all we can do is break it. So hide all the other pins that we know we don't need. Check whether they're equal. So what we could do is take this and put it in a macro once we've finished. If it's true we want to break. Yep, so we'll take all of that, create a macro from it. Just obviously going to have to clean it up a little bit because it's it's a bit all over the place. That one needs to go. So the input would be the name again. And we need an output. Should be the job and found and not found. So I have the three outputs there. We'll put found at the top, then the job, then not found. The job is a construction job structure. Just from there, completed goes over here, and well, actually, quite sure how we can. Yeah, I think we need a boolean. Because otherwise we're not going to know that we found what we're looking for. Then here we'll branch instead. Take the literal boolean and put it over there. Branch on it as well. So that just means that we can make sure we give the right output. Create a boolean, it's false by default. If we find it, we assign it to true, break out of our loop, come here. If we happen to go through all of that without ever hitting the true scenario, we'll come down to here, boolean will be false, and we'll leave there through the not found. And this will be called find existing job. So here we can call the find existing job. If we find it, we want to break the structure and set by reference. And add. So we just need to add the existing population to the new the new population to the existing population. If we found the job. If we haven't found the job, then no, I think the other way is better. If we don't find the job, then we don't do anything. Also, when we do add the population, we have to handle the current time. So we'll get to that in a minute. It's a very similar scenario for the unassign, except we forgot to set that to an integer. So in this case, we'll find the job. If it does find it, we just need to switch this one to a negative. I think it's the other way around. We want them. That. And that. So bottom 2 to there and the bottom. Yeah, so we're saying in this case, current population minus new population, set the value. And in this case, we're saying, I suppose it doesn't really matter which way around they are, but I think that reads a bit better. We also need to make sure that we don't go below 0, though I don't think it's not going to technically be possible, because we shouldn't be able to unassign more population than we have, but we'll do the check here. So we want to take this max takes the largest number of the inputs, which is either our new assigned population, or 0, whichever is bigger. So if we do happen to take away more population than we've assigned somehow, this will make sure that we only ever set the value to 0. So that's kind of the basics. That doesn't account for actually any progress in the job, any or setting up the elapsed time or anything like that, which we'll get to soon. So we also need a way to show show the progress of this job, which I missed in the UI side of things. So we'll go back over here. So we've got the type of job, the amount of people, and what we'll do is, I think we called it, what did we call the widget that we used in the previous version? So somewhere around in details, research. So we did have the timer and our current design and our task. That's where it was. Task, timer image. Okay, so we didn't create the timer image separately. It's all part of a task, which I think makes sense from this perspective, but does mean that we kind of can't utilize that quite so easily. But we'll just redo it again. Too many minimizing. Should be able to redo it fairly quickly, given we know everything that we had. So I take the image, drop it in there. Can't find the clock. So we just want to pick the completely full one, so that's where we start. And I think we also want a vertical box there instead. Then we can put some text underneath the clock. not that big of a text. Oops. I think that and the alignment slightly better. Quite sure why when I'm zoomed in there that far everything disappears. It's a bit annoying. But yeah, so now we've got our clock and we've got our value for it. Remaining time. So for convenience, we'll just put all this into a separate graph for dealing with the mine construction. And we'll start with the click of the button. So that should be the reduce builders. Click. Increase builders. Oh no, we did that one. Increase. We'll need the image, and we'll need the mine builders, and we'll need the remaining time, which may not be a variable. That one, variable, mine remaining time, mine timer image, so just basically prefix everything with mine in this case, so it's clear. So we know in this case that the job's always going to be mine, because that's what we're going to use throughout. So it's the castle that has to manage the jobs, because the jobs have to be scoped to a particular sector, and the castle is the thing that the player controls. So the first thing that we need to check is get player controller and get controlled pawn, and is valid. We'll do the other is valid, because if the player is not currently looking at a sector in which they control, therefore they don't have a pawn, we just want to ignore the mine increase builders. If they do have a controlled pawn, then we can do stuff. But from this blueprint where we're actually just for the client, so we want to tell the server that we want to do something. And how do we want to do that? So we know we want the job to start in the castle, so we could actually just trigger the event on the castle itself to start that construction. So I think that's where we'll do it for the time being. Where's that construction component? So if it's valid, we can cast to a sector, but we won't actually have access to the castle, kind of like we said yesterday. The sector's references to the buildings aren't replicated, which is actually not going to help in this case. I know they will, because they themselves are replicated, just not the references. So I think we'll throw it via the player controller then. So we'll just put this in here. Custom event. Assign builders. So we're just going to call this custom event from our... So we still have to cast to the player controller. In this case it's our test player controller. We can use this convert to pure cast because we know that that's what it's going to be. And that means that we don't have to connect up the white line. And then we can call our, whatever the event was, assign builders. Oops, dragging it all over the place. Function. Now we know in this case we want it to be the mine, and we're always going to assign 10 population with that button. So just need to compile that. Set it as the builders instead. And pretty much just need to do exactly the opposite for our reduce builders, but instead of that it will be -10. So if we're not replicating our references in our sector, it is going to be more difficult to update our UI with the appropriate things. That said, I think we must be replicating the castle because we already do the update of the UI. We didn't need to do the get player controller, but we needed the player controller anyway. Oops. Okay, so we can't have 2 event ticks. Kind of makes sense. Update mine construction, and then over here we can do update mine construction. Just drop that in there. So here we want to get the pawn again. We must have done a get player pawn call here. So we get the pawn, and we need to cast it to the right type, and then from that we can get, because now we've got, no, it's not that one, is it? We want to cast to a sector. Again, we know that, assuming it's valid. We want to cast it, and then from that we can get the castle reference, and then from our castle reference we can get our construction component, unwanted. And then from our construction component we can find, so that may be an issue with the way that we've put together our find existing job. What we actually want is that to be a function in this case. so that we can call it from other places. Oh, I spelled it wrong anyway. Oops. So the literal bool still works here, so we'll just keep it as that. Even though we could use a local variable instead. So just tie these back up. And we need to add our return. Which will be our job. So one thing we can't do with a function is actually return under 2 execution, I don't think. No, we can't have multiple execution paths. We don't want it in that one. So the only way to kind of balance that out is to just return the Boolean value. We'll leave the branch in just in case we change how it works somewhere along the line, but we have to return the Boolean value instead. We'll get rid of this one and use our function instead. So it's just that instead of the whatever we had before. And result should be the same. Oh, we need the assigned population too. So that would be value and the target. Make sure all the pins are connected. Looks about right. So now in our gadget we can use the construction component to find an existing job. Again, we know it's going to be called the mine. So we do have a pawn. See if we can find that job. If we can, then we just need to set these values. So we'll ignore the timer for now. We'll be able to set the builders and the remaining time. So we'll call set text on that. And set text on this one. So we want to convert the assigned population to the builders and the current time to our time box, time text value. Just arrange these. So in the builders, we'll actually say minimum digits is 3. So that stops the value wobbling around. Maybe we won't. We'll leave it at 0 for now, see how it looks. And tie them up, straighten it up. That's that. So hopefully nothing will break. Yeah, so we have some errors related to the castle reference, so just see if that building is replicated properly. So it's replicated to the owner only, so it should be okay. Maybe it was just it's not a constant error, so I'm guessing there must be a scenario where it's not quite set. So we get the player pawn, cast it to a sector. I guess there may be a scenario where it doesn't have a castle just yet. So we'll just drop this in there to catch that potential problem. And that should, yeah, now error free. So now when we press this button, it should create the job and add the 10 people to it, and we should see that reflected in the UI. Obviously that was a bit much to expect in one go. We want the text to be self-hit test invisible in both buttons, because clicking on the text actually stopped the button being pressed. It kind of got in the way. Still gets in the way. How do we make it stay out of the way? Yeah, not really sure. Maybe self-hit test it invisible isn't what we want the text to be. It actually seemed to make it worse. Yeah, we can't click on the text. It's not great. Anyway. Test widget. Okay. So let's find out what happens. We'll just reduce it down to a single player, and we are running on a dedicated server as well at the moment. So press plus. So we do have a sector, so we're assigning buildings. Test player controller. I think I just skipped over that, so just do it again. Yes, didn't quite get that command down to the right place. So we've sent it to the player controller, but we want to actually do the assign builders on the server. So it'll be up to the server to check that there's population in the castle, that they can allocate them, but we're going to ignore that for the time being and just simply create that job. So we want to get the pawn again that we are controlling. This is the player controller, so I thought we'd get control pawn. I think that's what we want instead, just so that we're definitely getting this player's pawn. So the pawn is going to be a sector, so again we'll have to cast it to our sector. We shouldn't be here if the player doesn't have a sector, but again, we'll just make sure that it's safe. If we do have a sector, we need the castle. Get the construction component. So I remember we got that. Yeah, we're going in for the read over there, so that's fine. So we go all the way down to the construction component, and within the construction component we want to call the assign population. Event for that job and those people. So hopefully something new will happen, but not quite. Find out why. So we definitely come to the right place. Seem to have control pawn. Come into our construction component. Okay, so we won't have, in this case, the existing job, will we? So we're kind of expecting that we'll call this begin job because this is where it gets added. We could do that. But we could also do it over here. Like that. So rather than calling two things, we can now just assign the population and the job will be created for us. Still not quite right. Let's try again. So we shouldn't find a job. Yep. Therefore we should go here and we add a job. So yeah, we can see the name is mine, the assigned population is 10, initial time is 0 and elapsed time is 0. That's being added to our array. So this will be no job. This will be no castle. Let's see where we are with that. So we're saying no job. Still saying no job. Okay, so in our test, it's probably because we haven't actually replicated it all, I don't think. The jobs array is replicated, but I don't think the component itself is. So we need to replicate the component too. and see if that makes any more sense. Nope, it doesn't look like it. So when we go into here, we do have job of mine. Condition is true. Assign it. Condition is false. Okay, so the assigning is not quite working in our component. So let's just create it as a local variable instead, just in case there's some reason why it's not working. Default to false. Instead of assign, we set to true. And get rid of all that and just pass that straight back out. Let's see if that makes any difference. That's worked. So we'll go back over to our widget. I'll just take them out so that we don't keep spamming them on the screen. Okay, so now we can increase, and that's about it. Why doesn't it add? Solution component, assign. I guess we want to make sure that we're finding the job correctly on the second go. So we have value should be 20. Yeah, but our population hasn't changed. So we should be doing this on the server and then replicating that data to the client. So even if the assigned population should be being executed on the server in every case, we can verify that quickly with a can't even do the has authority check in a function. I don't think that that's the problem. Parent components, I'm not sure that it's parent component. Owner should be fine. yeah, so we don't have a scenario where we don't have authority. So this is all done on the server. Maybe it's because the return is a copy. Let's try this. Get a reference. Don't think that's actually going to change anything. What we need instead is to return the index, and then in our assign population we can, instead of breaking that, we can from this get a reference for that index and then do that. Let's see if that makes any difference. So we've done it the once, do it twice. Actually, it seems to have made it worse because we've lost it completely. Okay, so that wasn't the problem. So we add the job with the 10 people. But we add 10 more. We go to the right place. We've got the right value. But it doesn't change the number, so let's find out how much it thinks it is after we click the button. Yeah, so the server says 20. It must be copying it. And the only way I can think of making it not a copy is by using a macro instead, I think, maybe. No, because we can't return it by reference in either case. And when I did try and change it by reference, it didn't work. Just made it even worse. Okay, let's give this another go. Okay, so that works this time. Not quite sure what I did differently. So I think what we need to do is change our existing jobs. Put that one up there. So we also need to make sure the going down is done properly. So this is actually only valid when we want to modify it. So put it there. So in this case, if the job doesn't exist, we don't really want to do anything at all. And index is over there. So we should be able to go up and down now. Not quite sure why 0 is blank, but we can also go negative. Which shouldn't happen because that should stop it. I have to add it first to remove it. How are we even not getting here? Maybe what we've done, and maybe it's better solution anyway, but maybe we're just calling assign population both times. Yes. But we're just assigning it with -10 instead. Maybe that's better. So in our construction component, we don't need to unassign. We just need to take the max and apply it here as well. And now we should be able to go up and down, but not further down than 0, which is where we want. So we don't actually need unassigned population. It's kind of nicer to have the add and the remove for clarity, but because assign sounds like it's more adding, but it doesn't actually. It's not add builders or add population. It's set it, so that may work okay. So when the population changes, we do need to update the job, and we're in the construction component. Yep, so we don't care about the begin play, but we're going to handle the tick in this case. So we want the elapsed time for every job to be increased by effectively once a second. So we have to multiply that float by float, and divide. So that should give us our change rate relative to the frames per second, and we want to iterate over all of our jobs, assuming we have some. And we can't use the array element because it looks like it's a copy. Yeah, it must be because they have used that. Yeah, so an alternative would be to use just a standard for loop instead of the for each. In the construct find existing jobs, so we can do a for loop. The last index. I'm not quite sure if we can return from this a reference anyway. So we're just going to try it. Yes, I think it's going to copy it regardless. There's no way to say that our return value is a reference. Kind of have to stick with what we've got. Would have been slightly nice because then we wouldn't have to get it again with the index, but that would mean we'd have to put all of the code in here. Again, there just doesn't seem to be a way to return a reference to our construction job. Yeah, so that's just, there's no alternative really that I can see. It's okay. So we have to, from that, get a reference and break the job, and we're basically just going to add to the elapsed time our new value and set by reference. Target is that, value is that. So we basically set our elapsed time to our new value based on basic progress. And now we need to update the current time. Now the reason we haven't updated the current time in any other occurrence is because the current time depends on how many people there are, what was the initial time, and then how much time has actually passed. Doing it that way means that the current time can reflect changes in population better. If we were tracking the current time as we made changes, then we'd have to recalculate everything anyway. So what we do is we take the initial time and we divide it, I think we have to divide it on a float, by, oh, come on, by the population, and then we take away from that the elapsed time, and then we set the value of current time to that. So we haven't actually defined what our initial time is because we didn't call this begin job. That's probably why we wanted it. So yeah, we won't add the job there then, like we intended. We would add the job just here with some initial time, and what we can do in the widget, what we'll do actually, we'll say if we click the image itself, we'll start that job. So we have to get the player controller, the pawn, check it's valid, cast it, all of that. We don't want the player controller though, we want the pawn. It's a bit long-winded to get the castle that we want, that we're actually in control of. But nonetheless. Construction component, so we could probably macroize all of that, create a macro to make this process easier if we keep doing it, or we could remember the castle potentially too within the widget. So our job is going to be mine, and we're going to say it's going to take 300. One thing that we do need to do is make sure that we don't create 2 mine jobs, but we'll just ignore that for now. So we can press the spade button. Currently having nothing happening. Press the spades. No, it says okay, we got the spades. There seems to be some really awkward alignment issues with things not being clicked on. It might be relevant to the fact that things disappear when I zoom in or something, but if we play it we can see that hovering over certain areas like there, we can see the spawn button changes slightly coloured. So everything's a bit off. But won't worry about that. Resume. Okay, so we can see that basically that's the elapsed time working, but it didn't look like it initialized correctly, probably because we've divided by 0 somewhere and screwed it all up. So go back here and we need to make sure that there's more population, so we need to say if it's greater than 0, then we want to deal with updating the elapsed time. Otherwise we just leave the current time as is. What we could do though, and one thing that it does do in the game, is set it to -1. So if we click this, the icon now, we can see there's -1. It's just not going to change. Now once we've got the task all working and we were kind of tied up like we had before, that would actually be the infinity symbol we could put there. So now when we assign people, if we could assign people, let's find out why we can't assign people. Good point. So assigning people without the job shouldn't do anything. So find existing job, that should be false. We don't do anything. So we click our spades, get our -1, but we also seem to lose our population. But now let's see what happens here. Still says we haven't found a job. Okay, so Maybe we're beginning the job on the wrong place. We need to do that only on the server. Might have been the problem. Yep, now we've got the job and we can see that we have some progress. So obviously the 300 is going to take quite a while to go down, because we've only got 10 people on there, but we can remove that and resume. So we can keep adding lots of people, bringing that value down. Still going down quite slowly, but it's actually, we actually kind of gone into the decimals where we don't want to be. So if we go back up all the way down to only 10 people, we can see there's 29.01 now, or 29.1. So if we put that all the way back up to 200, let it count down a little bit, and then back down to 10, we can see that the value kind of is similar value. It hasn't jumped by any significant amount. The progress is still the same progress. It's just been applied to a bigger number effectively. So what we want to do is clean up the widget a little bit. So when we are displaying the population, that's fine, but when we're displaying the remaining time, we don't really want the fraction numbers. So now we should see -1, give it 10 people, it's exactly 30. We can bring that up. And then we've got one left. So that's one. Well, I don't really know what that represents really at the moment. It's just one. When it gets to 0, we're going to be done. But within the actual game, it actually represents the amount of rotations. So but because we also have 10 people on it, we are seeing a bit of a decline. So just check the numbers that I was working on earlier to get an idea of what values there should be. So basically this time counts down 12 for every one of these numbers that go down. So we're going to tie up the image. Yeah, we'll tie up the image with the current value. So we'll have a little function for this. Date time image, and we're just going to pass in here our time as an integer, and call that here, and our time, sorry, we'll do it as a float just again so we don't have to do the conversion for no reason. So take our time. Now let's say we've done all the clock timer thing before, so we've got our frames, and easily enough we can just copy all of this over. So timer frames, this paper sprite, an array. We've got them in place. Yeah, so that's what we did with it before. So I think actually we probably want very similar behavior in our new widget. So take them out. Keep doing that, grabbing the wrong thing. So we'll divide float by float by 12. We'll modulus by 12 as well. That one goes into that, and that one goes into that. It's basically what we had before. And then as like our task, we just need the same thing. So we just want to take that as an integer now. Frames are timer frames. Timer image is mine time image in this case. So I think actually what we could do is pass that in. No, it's image. Can we pass that in? Guess so. That means this function is completely generic. So if we want to add similar functionality to another timer within this UI, we can. Here we need to take the mine image. Okay, let's see what that one looks like. So we need to make it so that our increment is only 1, just so that we can see what it looks like when there's only one assigned population. So where's our button presses here? So we'll assign 1 and we'll unassign 1. So basically when we start we should have -1. So I think one thing we did wrong was if we come in here and we try and get -1, that's not going to work. So we'll use the max again to make sure that we're only ever going to get something above 0 effectively. That'll stop it disappearing off. So now our time is correct. When we add 1, because it's 300, we should actually see 25 underneath. Some really bad lag somewhere. And we can see the clock there. It has moved a little bit. So hopefully if we look at it long enough, it'll actually change. It's not going well. So we'll just take this and print it out. I'll just print it to the console so I can see what value it is. Create that job. Oh, I forgot to actually say what value it was. So start the job. So yeah, that's not too bad in terms of the way it displays. Add a person. Okay, so at the moment it's going down. It's going down approximately 0.01 a second, which is particularly slow. So that must be something to do with our construction component and whatever logic I did to try and make it work with the frames per second. Perhaps we don't need that one at all. So start the job, add someone. Yeah, that's better. So now it's ticking down on the clock once per second, instead of once every 60 seconds. So obviously that's still going to take a while to finish, but what the players can then do is add more to it. And we can see that the clock kind of keeps ticking down. Once we get close, the player can kind of remove assigned population, and the ticking does go down, but any progress they've made is still recorded. So if we go all the way back down to 0 now, we obviously can't see what progress we might have had, but if we add that 1, we can see that it actually says 22 instead of 25 that it was originally. So any progress they made is always saved. Now obviously we can get to the point where we almost finish, so it's got about 6 left, it says. It did look like the value changed halfway through, so there's definitely an issue there. It says 7, which appears to be correct. Yeah, so there's probably some issues still. Going to the number, that should be 12 now. I think maybe what we did wrong, so we definitely don't need that, was in the widget we floored it over here. Over here. I think maybe we want to seal it instead. See if that makes it a bit clearer. So it's 25, sticking down. Take that. So there's definitely some weirdness there. It goes from 1 to 0. According to the time, so the countdown says, if we could put that over there, we can see that it actually goes from like 8, 7, 6, gets to midway, and then the bottom number goes down. So that will be a rounding issue again. So here, basically we just take that out of the way because that's only needed for that display. That one is our remaining time. So in this case, we have rounding mode is half to even. So if we make that half to 0, yep, let's try that one. That should mean that when it's 6, so we go all the way down again, just put that over there so we can see them all in one place. So yeah, we're still not quite working. It's still saying that 6 is, because it's 0.5 when it divides it, so it's not. This doesn't work, then I may just have to manually floor it myself. Yeah, so it's still saying there's. Let's try that one instead. Yeah, so that works. So there is a scenario where, as we can see, once it kind of gets to 12 doesn't work. Yeah, because we seal it up. So when we're kind of like, what was it, 11, yeah, it should be 0.9. We go up to the frame. So we can come in here with a value of something like 11, I think, or 0.9 by the time we've done this code over here. So we modulate it of 12, which gives us some high value, and we come into setting the frame. We seal the frame up to the nearest integer, which gives us a value of 12. Then we try and get the frame for number 12, which obviously doesn't exist. I wonder if it should exist and I just haven't added it. So if we check our textures, icons, yeah, so I think it's that empty one. Oops, too many. So we'll go into our sprites and we'll add another one. We haven't named the clocks particularly well, but at least they stand out enough to find them. And we'll do that. So now we get that blank look, which is not always used in the right place. But it does look like it's working correctly now in terms of what's displayed. We're seeing 0 when it's over on the far right hand side. Only point in which it was a problem was basically just when we start off. Because that part works, but when we started it off, we do that, and that's wrong. It shouldn't go blank on the first tick. Not really sure how to fix that. To give it some thought, because it's technically true for every other circle but the first, and I don't know that it's the first. It's almost like I need to tell the timer that it's only going to show the blank on subsequent times, but yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, so the final thing we need to do to make this complete is finish the job, or finish the construction in this case. So in our construction component, it's going to update all the values, and once it's updated all the values, if the current time is less than 0, so we set it float there, set it to -0. So we have to be careful of when we set it to -1, but that's only in that branch. So we should be okay to say here that if this value is less than 0, we're going to say the job is complete. So we're going to call this event. But what we'd actually want to do is remove the job from the array. And we can't do that while we're iterating over the array, because it's going to break stuff. So we need to instead remember that that job's complete, and handle it later. Because it says, clearly states for the for each, don't modify it. However, yeah, we don't really want to do the for loop either. Yeah, so we don't want to where's the component one? We can't modify the array while we're iterating over it, and we want to take that job out of here and probably notify after that. Because if we notify here, we're still actually in this looping code, which is a bit ugly. So there's nothing that I can see here that we're doing that's particularly non-functionable, so we're going to take all of this. I think actually, can we take that as well? It's a function. Yep, that's fine. So we're going to have a local variable of completed jobs. actually going to have it as an array of integers, because we can store the index here, which saves us having to find it again. Since in this context, this loop here, we're not going to modify the array or change it, and because we're okay, that's not true. If I understand correctly, it is possible for things to happen in between for loops. Maybe not obviously, but potentially. So if we keep the index may not be the right thing once we're done. So to make sure that we are definitely going to remove the right thing, we'll store its name in our array. So then once we finish that first one, we can iterate over our completed jobs. We can call this event, but we do that after we've removed it. And we want to again find the index yeah, so we'd have to find the entire structure in that case, so we want to for each break see, since we can remove an item, but we'd need to know this, have a copy or the reference to the structure to remove, which is no good. We want to remove by index, so we've got to figure out what that index is. So if our completed job name is the same as our current job name that we are looking at, then that's true, and we want to split them out, remove that job. We want to trigger our event, and then we want to break from our loop so we don't find other jobs for no reason. And that should be all we need. So we initialize the job, assign a person to it, assign lots of people so we can get it done. So we've got 3, 2, 1, and it's done. So now what happens is the job's disappeared, so the timer's effectively stuck, and our console is logging lots of errors because we can't find that job. So we want the widget, we want the widget to listen for that event. So how do we want to do this? Update my construction. Yeah, so that's on every tick. The construction's only started when we click the image button. Not this one, this one. And in this case we do have the component. So we call begin job with our name, and bind event to job completed, and create an event. So we're going to have this as a specifically named function, online construction completed. A bit long-winded. And the input of that is going to have to be the job name. Now obviously we've named it specifically because we know that that's what we're going to bind to in this case. So yeah, I don't think that's actually true really. We don't know. There we go. Got it in the end. We don't know that it's the mine. All we know is that it's from the construction component, so it's something has completed. Now obviously we're going to ignore anything that's not a mine in this function. Is this all true? Yeah, because this event could occur multiple times for different jobs. So if we do have the mine, then we want to set the mine builders, mine remaining time, and the image. So we want the mine builders to just be maybe a hyphen. We want the remaining time to be 0, and the image, I think we want 12 because that's the frame we want effectively. This up. So now hopefully when our job completes, yeah, it sets everything accordingly, so it looks a little neater. And the big thing that we want to do is actually show them the mine. So the castle has a construction component. The castle is going to, or the construction component is going to trigger that event, but the only one that can actually create that building is our sector. So we have the spawn building command that we used before. So somewhere it's the army. Just need to find the bit where I spawn the castle. Claim sector, that's the one I wanted. So under building destroyed, we want to, before we blank that reference, we will want to maybe we don't have to unbind stuff, because once they're destroyed, so let's assume that that'll be fine. When we build the castle, we will want to get from the castle reference the construction component, and from that we'll want to bind to the event job, bind event to job completed function. We're in a function here too, yeah. So we can only do create event. So again, we know that this event is going to be a construction completed event, and it's going to take a name, property, there. When this is done, we actually just want to really call back to the place we just came from, really. Construct building. Yes, we just want to call the construct building. Function. And we're in a sector, so the owner should be the player controller that owns the castle. So in this case, we'll also need. What do we need? Where are we? So we're in a sector. Yeah, we'll get the castle reference and the owner, and we'll say that's the owner. I think the building is owned by the player, isn't it, because of the replication stuff. Yeah, so the player controller's here, we spawn the building with the owner. So while obviously in this case the owner is not a player controller specifically, it should be. So we can just cast it. Let's see what that looks like. So we'll start our job, allocate lots of people to it. Job should finish, mine should appear. I guess that's that. Yeah, so that's not too bad. I wanted to do something like this to firstly do something else rather than mess around with flags and castles and other things, to kind of just make some new progress. But also it's a good test of kind of the structure of stuff. I'm thinking maybe that there's still some awkwardness with possession of the sector and having to get the castle every time you want to do stuff. And I'm not sure if that's really going to make a lot of sense moving forwards. It might be better to do the reference the other way, so the player possesses the castle, but if we need to get sector information, then the castle will have access to the sector because that's the one it's on. That would be its parent as such. And doing it that way round might produce a better result, particularly when we're going to quite often need the castle from the player pawn, and we're having to go kind of a long-winded way round. The only downside is that the way our objects are put together, our castle inherits from our building, and our building is not a pawn, so obviously the player can't possess it. If we made it so that the player could possess the castle by making the building a pawn, or inherit from pawn, then we would in theory be able to possess any of the buildings, which is again not quite what we want. So not really sure what we can do about that. There's definitely some cleanness with having everything inherit from a building, so that things like the images are all handled in exactly the same way, and I haven't had to redefine it. It's just inherited. So there's kind of certain bits that are nice in the way that it works, but obviously that has its own problems with the castle referencing and the construction component, and having to kind of delve into that every time we need something. Forget what this new function is now. Yeah, let's just update. And that's delta seconds. Yeah, so there's still definitely some little bits of cleanup, particularly around this job process, but how to deal with the sector and the kind of depth there, because obviously having to get the pawn, cast it to a sector, get that construction component, both in numerous places, well, in quite a few places, just to get this all to work. It's just a bit untidy. Again, we're doing it here. Now I could obviously create a macro for that. I could produce some other solution, like maybe the player pawn. Yeah, so it's because the pawn is generic and we have to get it as a sector first, there's no way to avoid that level of the conversion. Then obviously they're just variables within it, so a macro is kind of like probably the way to go. We can also do the is valid checks internally. So yeah, so there's some elements that I might be able to clean up. It's just the duration. I think I'm okay with that not being there anymore. And there's a couple of errors that are warnings more so that I get in the output log when things aren't working. So construction component is accessing jobs that don't exist somewhere. Not really sure where. It shouldn't actually access anything that doesn't exist. Even on update construction job, it's for each loop. didn't tie that together. That wouldn't have worked very well if there was more than one job going on. One thing that we can do on the next stream is maybe make it so that we can build any of the 3 buildings, and see how much kind of duplication we have, and where, if anywhere, we can clean things up. But yeah, so it's pretty good. I think it kind of fell to place fairly well, and there wasn't any big surprises, which is always good, even if some of the elements don't connect as smoothly and as cleanly as I would like. But maybe just some helper functions and some helper macros would actually just solve the problem and make it easier. So on that, I am going to stop for this evening. She'll be back again tomorrow, hopefully with creating maybe another job, maybe even the rest of the building ones, and maybe looking at some other job completely, and whether we should reuse the construction component to deal with any job like research or factory jobs, or whether we should stick with the construction component on its own, because a lot of what the construction component does is going to be used in any type of job, for certain. There's not really anything in here that ties it to making a building, given that all we've got is this name of the job. So gonna have to see how that work pans out with doing something else, and whether we should have different components that manage different things, or whether there's really any purpose to that and just one component on the castle, or even just not even a component. We might be able to incorporate all of the components code within the castle anyway. It really is only just 3 functions and a little bit of events. So definitely things that I can do to maybe improve it and clean it up moving forwards. Yeah, so that's all for tonight. She'll be back tomorrow, so thanks for watching, and good night for now.